What's up everyone, Federico here. Today I want to show you the production and mix session for Within Destruction's latest release called the Plague of Immortality 2.0. I got to produce, mix and master this one. Of course it's a remake of their old single Plague of Immortality from the album Void. And we wanted to recreate it with a more electronic approach following the band's stylistic change that happened while writing the album Yokai. And I gotta say it was super fun because we had the chance to blend a ton of different genres and sound design techniques. So let's get into it. So the original idea behind this song was not to build electronic layers on top of the already existing song, but was to rethink the whole song in a more electronic key. So that's why, as you can see, drums are played only in a few sections, and as you will hear, bass and guitars are heavily processed and don't really sound like classic guitars. This is the actual session. It contains every production layer as well as mixing and mastering chain, of course. And as you can see, there's a ton of tracks. I think the total track amount is it's just above 300. So they're all very well organized into folders and buses because I need everything to be super clear when I'm working on sessions this big. And before we start, as you can see, all the sound design layers are rendered down to audio. I originally wrote them using MIDI, of course, but then before I mix them, I like to render everything down to audio. That way I don't second guess myself on arrangement choices and I can just move forward and think about how the song will sound. And that, of course, also saves a ton of resources on my CPU. So this is why you won't see any MIDI in here. That said, let's start. Alright, so this first part basically follows the old riff. Let me actually bring it up so you can compare it in case you didn't know it. This is the first version. So the song starts with radio guitars. There's an automation bringing up the volume, and after that there's a transition with guitar glitches. These are also automated. There's a filter that's opening up. After that, the drums and bass and regular guitars come in. The guitar tone was created by the band's guitar player Francesco Filigoi, who reamped these guitars, and I think he used the Neural DSP Gojira plugin with an octaver going on through the whole thing. So let's hear how these sound like. So below these guitars, I also created a couple synth layers, which sound like this. Moving on to the next section, this is where the beat starts and where things start to get weird. There's a lot to dissect in this section, so let's build apart layer by layer starting from the beat. First of all, there's a very simple 4 on the floor kick drum pattern plus a rhythmic sounding trancey noise kind of thing on top. Now let's add the bass. I wanted this bass to be super distorted and industrial sounding. I used the Isotope Trash 2 for this. Then let's add the guitars. These were sidechain. I used the Dodge Pro for this. Yeah, as you can see, these are pretty much playing the role of a synth, and the bouncy movement really helps us achieving that kind of vibe. Now let's add the bass synths. So all these synths build upon guitars and bass to create a very synthetic sound. Of course, we also have vocals on this section, but unfortunately I only had the single stereo vocal stem from the old song that I could work on. So I doubled it and created different effects to make it more dynamic and interesting throughout the song. So here's how some of these sound like. So of course these don't sound super clean, but I think in the context of a techno or electronic remix they kind of make sense. Most of these effects were created with vocal synth, and I can't really show you the settings right now because these tracks are freezed to save up some CPU resources, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. This was done with Quadrophase, which is the multiband distortion in Cubase, and these, Beast and Imp, were done with the Beast plugin by Solemn Tones, which is a vocal pitch shifter with some 4-month shifting capabilities. It's very cool. And then of course we have some delay throws and reverb tails. Let's move on to the following section. So this is probably my favorite part in the song, and it starts with this filtered drum loop. There's a filter opening up some panning automations as well, and below this we have this modulated bass. Where is it? And I also brought back this sample that I created for Yokai. I think it was used in Bang Bang. I think it's kind of a trademark sound, and I wanted to use it again. And then of course we have some hits, impacts and reverse sounds on the transition. So this beat is a techno-inspired beat with 4-on-the-floor kick drum, a few snare layers on the third beat of each bar, and then on the second half on the second and fourth beat. And then we have a very busy hi-hat pattern with upbeat open hats. This rhythmic downlifter. And then the beat gets reinforced by the sidechain guitars. As you can hear, the guitar bass gets ducked on the downbeat. And the same thing happens on the sidechain bass. On top of the beat we have a few bass synth layers. This is my favorite one. By the way, regarding synths, as I've already said, I like to render everything from MIDI to audio when I'm mixing, and when I do that, I also rename the tracks and I label them with the role they have, or at least something that explains how they sound like. Like at this point, I don't really care if this was done with Serum or Omnisphere or anything like that. I just wanna take a quick glance at the track and know what role that thing is playing in the arrangement. So that's why you don't see anything specific here. But if you wanted some details on what I used, most of these synths were done with Serum. I also used a ton of Retrolog, which is one of the stock plugins in Cubase, and I used the Omnisphere a lot, so those are the main three. By the way, before we move on, let's compare this part before and after this production change. Definitely very different. Let's take a look at the vocal layers. So there's a very interesting thing I did here, automating a bit crusher. This is the stock bit crusher in Cubase. It's pretty subtle in the mix, but I think it reinforces that digital texture that I wanted this part to have. And then, yeah, we have a distorted layer. And these beast layers that I kind of used like artificial lows. Now the next part is some kind of mix between a dubstep techno orchestral section. Again, no drums in here, we just have the beat. So let's start with the beat again. We have a couple different kick layers and some reverse samples to, you know, change the pattern a bit. Then we have a few snare layers which become busier in the second half, and it all ends with a pitched snare roll. By the way, how cool are pitched snare rolls? I don't know who invented them, but give that man a medal, because they, I don't know, they sound super cool. It might be weird, it might just be me, but I love them. Anyway, on top of that, we also have some rhythmic sequences again. As well as a ton of risers and impacts. Adding bass and guitars, we just have these chugs which simply follow the old breakdown pattern. Now let's add some synth layers, starting with strings, choirs, and plugs. Again, most of these plugs were done with Omnisphere, but a couple layers were also Helion, which is the stock sampler in Cubase, which has some pretty cool sounds. Now let's add all the dubstep layers. These were all done with Serum, and once I like tweaked created and found whatever I wanted, I printed those tracks down to audio, and then I chopped them and moved around where they made the most sense to me. I think there's a cool interplay between these reverse stabs and the reverse kicks that happen just after that. So let's hear these layers by themselves. So the first one is following the guitar and bass part, because I wanted to have some more of that electronic digital texture. And then all the other ones are simply the stabs you've been hearing. I think this section is a very cool mix between different things, and the contrast that is created by the dubstep sounds with the more cinematic and orchestral sounds is very nice. In this section we basically go half tempo with the beat, and the whole part is pretty much a trappy sounding riser, creating anticipation for the following section. And I say trappy sounding because I use the trap hats as well as 808s, so let's listen to the beat. I still kept some of these fast rhythmic sequences, because I think once you start with the rhythmic feeling, it's very hard to take it away without making the song feel empty, and in this section I think it was fitting great. Above that we have a ton of, again, risers and impacts. Next, this is the 808. As you can see, there's two layers. One is clean, and it contains most of the low-end information, and the other one is filtered and distorted so that it could be heard on cell phones as well. And if I remember correctly, I created this 808 with Sublab. Next, we have again some dubstep bass synths, but these are different from the ones that happened just before. There's still this one playing the rhythm. And then we have this pretty much reinforcing the risers. And the other ones are stabs. Again, all of these were done with Serum. There's no bass and guitars on top of this part, and as for vocals, we have these layers. Again, here's another automation on the beat crusher. This part brings back some elements that I used in previous section, as well as some new ones. So let's start with the 4 on the floor kick and trappy bend hi-hats. Then we have actual drums on this part. And I also added this effect on top, which is basically an automated beat crusher and a phaser. Just to emphasize the digital texture that I was talking about. Then let's add the bass and guitars. This is just the regular part with the new tones. And then on top of it we have this synth bass that I used in the first breakdown, but it's the same sound, but it's actually playing the guitar and bass part. And then on top of it we have a few different choir layers. These were all Omnisphere. And some other plugs. These are different from the ones I used before. So this is the difference, in case you don't remember. I just kept a single vocal layer here because the arrangement was so busy already. There's quite a lot to unpack here, so let's start once again with the beat. I wanted to use a filtered kick to create more anticipation for this section. Then we have a single a snare layer and these fast hi-hats. A few impacts and a reverse sub-drop at the end. Then here I brought back the trap siren sample thing that I created for them, and I also reversed it at the end. And I added this layer. They really combine well with each other and create a trippy effect overall. And on top of it all, we have these guitars, which are basically filtered, beat crushed and pitched down in the first part and then pitched up here. Then we have this guitar glitch. I really like this transition with the triplet feel. The sidechain guitars are still in quarter notes. Then we have the obvious 4-on-the-floor kick, and then the overall thing gets filtered and the low end is taken away. Before the drop, where all the low end is released once again. Yeah, there's just some risers and impacts here, nothing major. In the following part, so the cool thing here in the drop is that the feel basically changes each bar between 16th and triplet notes. And as you can hear, there's always a ton of layers like fading in and fading out to create movement throughout all the sections. So of course, synths are also following that pattern. Well, not this one, because this is actually following the guitars, which are sidechained in every quarter. But these synths on top definitely follow the rhythm pattern. So let me play all the layers individually. And then, as you can hear at the end, I pitched some of these layers down to close the section. In the second half, I also added these plugs. So this is like a mix between all the plug layers that I've used previously. Another cool thing I used is this screechy impact kind of thing. Makes it sound darker and creepier. So yeah, is there something I forgot here? Just sidechain bass, following the sidechain synths, of course. And regarding vocal layers, yeah, I added a stereo layer with a doubler, just to make it a bit wider. And then some delay and reverb throws at the end. This is a cool transition thing that I did with a plugin called Shaper Box. It was placed on the drums bus, so this is actually the affected drums. And the plugin basically plays around with the timing of things and creates repetitions based on a pattern you can pretty much design in the plugin itself. Kind of sounds like a snare roll mixed with a hi-hat roll. For this part, let's start with the drums. Next we have regular bass and rhythm guitars. Which I alternated with sidechained bass and guitars here. Next we have, well, I already showed you the vocals here. Then the beat is reinforcing the actual drum pattern. One cool thing that I can show you is this layer called Industrial Glitches. This is how it started like. So all together, beat plus drums plus bass and guitars. I still wanted to keep the upbeat hi-hat to keep that trancy feel, but this is not as loud as some other sections, so. The bass is reinforced by these two layers. And then I brought back some of the dubstep bass steps. The coolest thing about this section, in my opinion, is the synths that I used. because I think they make this part sound like super futuristic, but also weirdly ethnic in some kind of way. So first of all, we have this Tuvan Chant layer, which in my opinion, in the mix, once you stack up all the other layers, sounds more like a didgeridoo. Next, I've added this synth that I love. It makes the whole part sound super watery and wet. Next, we have this rhythmic layer. And lastly, this one. All together. For guitars, I basically sliced the whole section. So everything you hear was done within Cubase. It was just simply sliced, repeated, or pitched up with the transpose thing here. So yeah, this was all done manually, and of course there's some like panning and volume automation throughout the whole part. Then we have a couple sidechain sections. And a lead guitar on top. The beat is simply reinforcing the drum pattern, but the upbeat hi-hats now become louder. Then something is also changing in the bass synth layer. It's not really noticeable, but I kind of like to mix layers, different layers in different sections to just make things less obvious. As far as vocal layers go, here I brought back once again the fake whispered layer, which in the context of the mix kind of sounds like a fake high scream, and I paired it with the beast and imp layers. Again, in my opinion, this made sense in this mix because it needed to sound a bit fake and digital, so they actually like help achieving that goal, but I probably wouldn't use them this way in regular production with normal harsh vocals. So we went for a chill beat kind of thing here, and the beat kind of becomes more intense as the section progresses. There's some light percussion and Foley sounds, and I used some more lo-fi samples for the kick and snare. Then of course there's a ton of impacts, downlifters, uplifters, risers, and so on. By the way, some of you guys asked me where I get my impacts and riser samples from, and to be completely honest, I don't always remember because I bought a bunch of packs and sounds in the past, and when I get new sounds, I always organize them in my folders, and more often than not, I rename them, so that way, when I'm looking for sounds, I can just read the names and have a rough idea of what the sound is going to be like even before listening. So I'm not sure where most of these come from, but I mean, there's a ton of impacts and samples floating around, so you can just Google impacts pack and just start from there. You can also take a look at Splice. Some of these samples definitely come from Splice, so you pay a monthly fee and then you have the license to use all of the sounds you get from that platform. Just maybe what I will suggest is to stack more sounds on top of each other, or edit them, add some modulation, distortion, whatever, so that way they sound more unique to your production. So the actual guitar solo was performed by Dean Lamb of Earthspire, who featured in the original version of this song, and then of course we have the same track to work with in this version as well. And I honestly just beat crushed it and EQ'd it lightly to make it sound a bit more digital, and then the last part also has a phaser. This first part is basically a quite simple trappy sounding transition with this beat, the 808, once again I used two different layers to have some distortion, and I used a different kind of distortion from the previous one. This is a bit darker and less saturated. And then we have regular guitars. Next, we have actual drums, as well as bass, and sidechain guitars here on the stops, which are only panned left. As you can hear, in the second half, the beat becomes more industrial sounding. So going over some of these layers. Then the actual drums stop again, and we still have just the beat, bass and guitars. And this is one of the sections where the techno feel is more obvious because of the upbeat hi-hat. Then on top of it, we have this bass synth. As well as these super soul synths. Strings and choirs again. And plugs. By the way, melody here is a bit different than the previous part, as you can hear. So even though there's similar tones, the actual arrangement is always shifting. And then the last thing we have here is these two layers. They're subtle, but they add some kind of video game vibe on top of it. And speaking of video game vibe, I had the idea to create some kind of Game Boy breakdown. So let's go through all the layers. This is the drums. So for this one, I used a contact library called GameBot by Fairly Confusing Waveforms. That's the name of the company. It's pretty cool. It contains like Nintendo Game Boy percussive sounds. And then for the bass, I used Retrolog. For guitars, I used the magical 8-bit plugin, which is this one. It's a very simple synthesizer. I think it's free, but it's perfect for this kind of stuff. So the layers are actually different. Here's one. And then I also used this. I think this one also comes from Magical 8-bit. They get harmonized in the second part. And I also have this one-shot sample on top. So when all other instruments are coming in, we have drums, guitars. In addition to that, I also kept the trappy and hi-hat samples. On the second half, just after the break, drums and guitars come back again with some impacts and a sub drop. We have this distorted 808 that's reinforcing the main theme. And I also added some super soul synths. Then I brought back the two lead synth layers that I used in the beginning of the song. And I reinforced them with these two black layers. So in this final part, basically everything becomes super heavy, but really the only thing that gets added besides the fast double kit pattern are these layers. And a couple rhythmic patterns here. Nothing major. So the main thing here on the ending is that there's an automation on the master bus where I placed Beat Crusher. As you can see, it's basically just automating the mix amount and the sample divider just here at the end. So this is one of the most fun and interesting projects and songs that I got to work on, and I realized some legacy fans of the band won't really like this style, but I love how the band really doesn't care about genre boundaries and they just want to try whatever they think is cool. So yeah, again, I had tons of fun doing it and I hope you had fun listening to it. I hope this video was interesting. If it was, please leave a comment and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.